And this is a challenge. All of us that involved in building product, regardless, you're product managers, you are engineering managers, and our program managers. We're in this unique role where we connect the two sides. We connect the engineering side. We also connect the business side. Where on the engineering side, we work with engineering teams, Scrum teams. The goal is to create a focused list of stories and tasks during our sprints so that we can execute. Where on the other hand, on the business, the customer market facing side, things are very dynamic. That you have evolving goals, you have different metrics coming from the product we shipped, coming from competitors and market dynamics. And also we have to be responsible for lots of stakeholders, the marketing, sales, the support, and others. So the person in the middle both plays a integral role to connecting two sides to make sure we have the team working on the right thing and have the product delivered to drive business results. On the other hand, also become the person stuck in the middle to both filter, prioritize product ideas that we want to, need to, and should work on before moving on to the engineering team. At the same time, we also have to provide insights and status updates and progress updates on where we are, when we're going to deliver certain features, so the downstream teams, the cross-functional teams, can take their part to do their job. And quite often you become the person stuck in the middle, and it's very challenging. So, and if this is not done well, many companies will look at the scenarios where you on the other side you have OKR misalignment, meaning even though we have the same goal. In this example, this is actually coming from Spotify. In this example, you can see the goal is to connect the teams, but if each of the teams is thinking differently, if your product manager A is thinking about building a bridge and your marketing team B thinking about digging a tunnel, it would be out of sync. Obviously, on the engineering side, because of dependencies, because when we start to get more than just one teams, inevitably you will get into situations that you need multiple teams. The coordination, the collaboration become even more challenging if we pass in a more team-based format. So how we do about doing this? The way to solve the stuck in the middle situation is, instead, it may be counterintuitive in the past that there's sort of the thoughts of protecting engineering teams from this too much influx of information. And also, obviously the engineering team will not possibly be in all these market-facing teams. Therefore, there's some sort of opaqueness on both sides. The idea is that with the technology, with the process of information flow, and using the right tools and systems, we can provide a context on both sides. We can provide accountability on both sides. So today we're always very familiar with the accountability of engineering deliver XYZ with velocity and timeline. There's not much talking about the accountability on the other side, where on the business side, I'll go to the market-facing side we're going to build a feature ABC to drive metric XYZ to grow our new customers by 20% or improve engagement by 15%. And that was only available in the beginning of product features, but wasn't really going back to look back to say, did we achieve it? What we could have done differently. So that accountability wasn't visible. Not that it's not done, it's being done by other teams. It wasn't really available. The other part of that is the context. Context today flows very normally from the top down, meaning from from the executives, from the market teams, about our goal is to drive revenue, to increase the stickiness of the app, etc. That may or may not flow into the engineering team, but the other side of the context, which is why we choose to work on feature XYZ, not ABC, and the limitation of resources are not available easily to the business side of the world. So the solution is to make sure not being the person in the middle become the bottleneck, but instead the person would orchestrate information exchange so that we will have that information readily available. So what does it mean? That means product team inevitably will have lots of demands coming, feature requests, customer needs, and product ideas from anyone in the company. And how do we prioritize? We cannot really prioritize based on some sort of score, right? You can use a right score, you can use benefit and cost. But how do you compare? How do you prioritize tech platform against new account growth? How do you prioritize pricing evaluation versus conversion funnel optimization? You cannot just compare apples to oranges. So the idea is that in addition to a prioritization within the same categories of product ideas and the feature requests, we also need to look at these categories holistically, taking a portfolio approach, because we don't just achieve one thing. We don't have one outcome that matter to us. So the portfolio means the way we need to balance different competing goals in the first place, the competing categories of things to work on first, then we prioritize within them. The second part of that is iterative planning so that we can allocate resources. In many ways, the people forget that, in the engineering development process, people would look at the stories and use that to plan your team's work. But that is too far down the road, require lots of details. So understanding and deciding what to work on, whether we have the resources at that level, it requires you already committed so much before get to that level of precision. So iterative planning allows companies to think about the effort required for various features at a higher level, so then we can do resource allocation at a higher level, tying into the portfolio approach, so that you can see what we can work on and what bottlenecks are before we moving down to the process to getting to stories written and built. Because the product managers, UX designers, and lots of other functions before a line of code is written also need to invest their time. So we need to make sure that iterative planning allows the progressive movement of the product development funnel, if you will. And then last but not least is provide a dynamic progress update for all your audiences. It is interesting, if you look at all these parts, and I will call these product management infrastructure. When you talk about the building product, there are many elements involved. There's a product management craft, as I call it, mostly around, as individual product managers, about user experience, user research, product interactions. Then you go to the technical aspect of product management, how you build technical solutions, is scalable, how you build technical solutions that's microservices and leverageable, etc. And then the part that's not talked so much is really product infrastructure, which is how different product teams work together, how product and engineering team work together, and how product engineering team and a cross-functional team work together, because it takes more than product manager, it takes more than engineers, it takes more than marketing, sales, customer support to completely brainstorm, design, build, test, ship, launch, and handle to the customer, get them to use and support that. So it's all part of the product. Now, let's look at the portfolio we mentioned earlier. And this framework, it's very obvious when you really think about it, right? So every company should have objectives, and objectives can be broken down into initiatives, but I would say it's not called broken down. Objectives is the ones that drives into consideration of initiatives. So instead of thinking about these are the 5 things that we're going to work on, we have to have a set of objectives first. Now, what company does really well these days, quite often, is that objectives are set by executive, fairly clean, right? You do it once a year and then review it once a quarter. And at the bottom level, it's done also fairly well. You have features, you have tasks, you have stories. It just get it done, clocking away. The challenge is in the middle. What is in the middle is that how do you go tie those projects and features into objectives wasn't clear. So that's the part where also the people in the middle, product engineering program managers, are the ones help to move that together. What does it mean? So at every company, you operate at a different level of time horizon. And also the time horizon gave somewhat almost connected to the degree of the range of autonomy. At the team level, individual level, things require a couple of days and week also effort that's typically already defined into the scope that individuals can have the degree of decision, prioritization, as well as innovative thoughts around that. Now, at the company level, that has to map to a larger or direction, the larger time horizon. So when we look at executive level, they look at annual time horizon and focus on things how to get there. That's the quarterly milestone. So when we talk about an objective, the initiatives are the ones that executive working with the people in the middle to say, in order for us to achieve these objectives, what kind of initiatives we should go about it. And that's really differentiated from company to company, because which company doesn't want to grow revenue? Which company doesn't want to reduce cost? Which company doesn't want to extend into new market? Which company does not want to have bigger platforms? So in the end, if you look at objectives, they're almost the same from company to company, where the initiative, which is the strategy, how you achieve these objectives, that really defines how the company and product team works. So the time horizon gives both the scope and size of the autonomy and innovation at different level, as well as connecting the different time horizons at different level of the company. So you have this cohesive, both top down saying objective drives the decision of initiative and prioritization of initiative, and the prioritization and the initiative will be the ones that have to be evaluated, assessed against objective, and so on and so forth. So now I want to talk very briefly about the analogy of product management. This is a slide I took from Medium, a post by David Sachs, who was the first PayPal CEO, Yammer's founder, and today he's the founder and of Craft VC. I was lucky enough in my early career at PayPal where the terminology came around, actually, and that's how we operate for a good 15, 16 years since I was first exposed to that. The concept is that every company, every team would have sort of the rock, pebble, and sand, the larger initiative and smaller product features, and the things that the bugs and the issues that coming up all the time. So I want to highlight that it's not that you break rocks into pebbles. That's not the concept. The rock itself is the larger undertakings of the company that would move the needle to some of the main objectives, as we saw earlier. So the idea is to identify the rocks, which is the initiative we saw earlier slide. Identify the rocks. These are the needle movers, and to coordinate across the teams that could be involved in that, so that they will get done and planned and done first. Then you fit into pebbles, which in most cases are improvement of UIs and tweaks and V2, V3s of existing products. These are the things that are not critical on itself, but over time, if you don't do it, your product would fail because poor UX, and it's like a death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? And sands are the ones that you don't plan, there's production issues coming through. The idea is to go through the process of plan and allocate the bigger one first, and then you put the other things together. Now, this is well understood and operates really well when you start to plan the bigger things. But how does it play out in the larger, meaning more than a couple teams concept or portfolio concept? What in the portfolio concept, I would further expand it, and it was actually practiced. It wasn't really articulated much, in that the jar itself changes, meaning each of the jars you can consider as almost are one of the goals or strategic themes that the company undertaken. For example, you could have goals of expanding into a new product line. You could have company goals of increase the market penetration of the core product, and so on and so forth. At the different time, the company depends on where it stands in the market, meaning the performance, the current product, the competition, the macro and the customer and conditions that would decide how much we should invest in new market expansion and how much we should invest in existing product penetration. And this is where the product leaders and executive and cross-functional leads decide and agree on. And that will become the size of the jars where we would use to later allocate our resources and use it for prioritization. So we're going to talk a little bit about the jars. So I want to just highlight a bit of the portfolio. It is a little bit unconventional as the traditional project product management think about portfolio. Traditionally, think about portfolio as a basket of projects, but that's really limiting how a portfolio is defined. And here, a portfolio is more of a portfolio of choices in different dimensions. Every single product that we build that serves multiple purposes. If you look at the one of dimension, that's the business outcome. What does this product do to our business? Does it generate revenue? Does it reduce cost? And so on and so forth. And that's a little bit selfish, but it's important. Now, there's another dimension, which is the customer. And what does this product serve? Is it existing customers, new customers, enterprise customers, SMB? Is it our partner? So the customer is another dimension. And then we also have to decide as a portfolio of customers. And when we decide on our features, we have to decide how much we're going to invest or prioritize towards this segment of customers versus the others. That's one dimension of the portfolio. The other dimension of the portfolio will be the goals. The third part, a lot of times, are not necessarily fully recognized, are the teams. For us to build product, we would need teams. And the team would have different skill sets, different focuses. And today, most companies will have this agile teams that's static. It is good for the team, but it doesn't really fluctuate or adapt to the needs based on the business, because the team is static. The needs of the business and our customer or market evolves, where we need to focus is different. So that kind of leads to some of the rise of the pods or the tribes that people know of the Spotify model. But how you decide on it, and the multidimensional portfolio plus the high-level planning will help indicate how much resources we will need for certain features and programs and initiatives. So that will help us to organize our team along the lines of the needs. So what I want to also highlight is additional dimensions, so we didn't put it over here, are things like categories. If you think about it, most of the OKRs are quarter or annual focus, but doesn't really get us to longer term our product vision, which is progressively being developed. So many companies, product managers know the concept of S-curve. So you build the first product and the product grow, and then you add another product so that you have continuous growth, because eventually one product would stall out, or product features or functionalities. So as the PMs, the product managers, we need to be So we are doing our quarterly alignment, our strategic alignment. Not only need to think about OKRs and the customers, we should also think about what's the next phase of the product. When is the time to look at it? And the S-curve is a tricky conversation, and it's worth having. The idea is that if you are starting that at the end of the current curve, then you could be too late. If you start too early, you spread too thin. So that's the art and science of product management, to say how much of our growth can be sustained with a certain amount of the resources, and how much we need to start investing in new things. I want to use an example we had at PayPal, where in the earlier days of PayPal, majority of the revenue of PayPal came from eBay Marketplace, and PayPal had eBay Marketplace penetration of over 50%. And at that time is a huge cash cow for PayPal. Obviously, there's lots of work still to be done to optimize to grow from 50% to much higher. At that time, PayPal also recognized that for every merchant, every seller that are on eBay, there are hundreds that are not. So these merchants have very similar needs, and probably even more, to sell and run their business online. And that is a S-curve product to cater into that market, to cater into these merchants. And when do we start that? Everyone recognizes there's a new market, but when do you start it? Do we start it at the penetration of eBay at 50%, 75%, or more? The decision was actually a lot earlier. It's not 75, it's much earlier. The reason is because it would take a longer time to actually drive meaningful product adoption and also test out the product. So despite lots of the arguments and displeasure of the eBay, PayPal formed a small team for merchant services and started to test the market, did a lot of product change because there's still quite a bit of work to be done to make the core product work. So the rest of the history, back in 2003, 2004, eBay accounted for more than 90% of the PayPal revenue, and PayPal had less than 5% of the small business online payment market share. And to fast forward today, the eBay accounts for less than 10% of the PayPal revenue, where PayPal has expanded to more than 60-70% of the online market, online payments for SMBs. So the decision of the S-curve was critically important at the timing, and more often than not, it needs to start earlier at the small, and then you increasingly expand the size of the team if that turned out to be a success, because not everything turned out to be success. So I'm going to take an example of portfolio alignment and allocation. As you can see, we have 3 categories of product themes. There's core product will drive most of the revenue.